Hey folks, this is James Kennedy at the Peace Through Strength channel here on Rumble. And we have a special guest with us today. And it's Mr. Jesse Beltran, who has been working with victims of Havana syndrome and also investigating implants that are used for what seems to be two-way communication between people and surveillance networks. So without any further ado, here he is, Mr. Beltran. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the history of where you are or how you got here and what's been the bulk of the work in that area?
Okay, yeah. Well, again, thank you for giving me this platform. My name is Jesse Beltran. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from the city of Sacramento in California. I've held several positions over the years. One of them was the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. And I was the president there, and currently I'm the president of Cosmic Clarity Connections, which is an organization that puts on conferences with expert speakers from around the world to talk about the topics that are present and mainstream that are not, well, I shouldn't say mainstream, but are not disseminated amongst the general population. More specifically, what people want to hear about right now is my work over the last 20 years with, experts, physicians, and scientists, and what we were finding. And when I say ICE Act, I'm referring to the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies, and so I'll use it to be a little bit shorter. How that came to being is I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall, who is a board certified anesthesiologist, who was addressing a phenomenon that was happening back in 2009, 2010, and earlier. He was speaking to individuals who were coming to him complaining about having this acute onset of weird sounds. And they would also complain about having migraines, nausea, vomiting, balancing issues affecting their balance, which is vertigo. In addition, they were talking about having electric shocks to their extremities. And what was happening is Dr. Hall would do what is called an RF scan. He would use a frequency detector to see if there was some type of signal being emitted to these individuals. And he was having positive results. And so I said, well, why isn't anything being done about it? And he said, the problem is most people go to their general practitioner, start complaining about these symptoms. And as soon as you mention that you're hearing these acute auditory symptoms, you automatically get railroaded into the mental health industry, psychiatry. And most recently, what has helped us bring this phenomenon to the forefront is on March 8th of 2024, the Department of Homeland Security held a hearing about the Havana syndrome. And for those who aren't familiar with the Havana syndrome was a phenomenon that was happening to our diplomats in Havana, Cuba. And they were complaining of an acute onset of these strange sounds, vertigo, nausea, migraines, short-term and long-term memory fog. So they were having memory issues. In addition, some were having these shocks to the extremities. And the United States initially didn't believe it. They tried to say it was crickets that were making these sounds that they were hearing. But that doesn't explain why it was they were having these other symptoms associated with that. The United States didn't take it seriously until 2014 when 2016 until the Canadian diplomats were also having the same phenomenon happen to them. Now, all of these members of our embassies also were claiming that some of their family members were having these symptoms. And retired Lieutenant Greg Egren gave testimony to the fact that the Havana syndrome is very real and is not only happening in Havana, Cuba, but is happening here in our homeland and on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. And they're all identical. So I'm going to go back to when I had that meeting with Dr. John Hall. I asked him, he gave me the explanation on why nothing was being done with it. So I said, okay, well, why don't we create a situation where we can start using tangible data so we can start converting it over to something that's more objective instead of these subjective complaints. So back in late 2009, 2010, that's how we came up with ISA Act. I called our first meeting in Sacramento, California, and said, if you're having these symptoms, please come talk to us. And that first meeting, we had 100 individuals show up, and they all had these very same symptoms with very, very little deviation. And I found that fascinating. So it was at that point I say, okay, we're going to hold our second meeting. We did that in Davis, California, and we're going to start doing this RF testing. So we did surveys, so we can get a little bit of history of everyone. And we would go into these scans blindly. We didn't want to know where they thought they were having symptoms, or any theories. I never looked at any of the surveys or the applications that anyone gave us. So we started doing these RF testing, and what was interesting is we started to see a picture. Now we had 300 people show up at that meeting in Davis, California, and what the pictures began to paint is that the individuals were mostly affected on the Pacific Coast were Caucasian women, highly educated, recently divorced, widowed, or single for whatever reason, and then it became Caucasian males, African-American females, African-American males, Asians, and then it dwindled down in ethnicity from there. We went to the Midwest, exact same results, until we got to the Chicago area where it flipped in ethnicity in the top two tiers, where African-Americans were the primary subjects there, then secondary were Caucasians, everything else stayed consistent. And that stayed consistent all the way to the East Coast with one exception. In Virginia, I was invited to go speak to a group of folks there, and they were all military subcontractors. I thought that was very interesting. But by then, I had been doing this for so long and analyzing the data. And what I did recognize that there were a certain group of individuals who were highly affected by this. And when I say highly affected by this, I mean completely debilitating. Now I've had doctors, lawyers, I had politicians come to me, white collar workers, blue collar workers throughout the years. So I've seen the gamut. And what I was seeing, and it was intuitive, that those who were highly affected also tended to be what I would call highly suggestible. And I had been practicing hypnosis since early 2000s and became a certified master hypnotist with a diploma in hypnotherapy in 2014. And I did this for a reason. I wanted to make sure that I understand and understood suggestibility to a degree that was better than the layperson. And so that's why I did this. And so when I was in Virginia with these military subcontractors, I decided to test for suggestibility there. And I had asked everyone in the group, if you thought you were highly suggestible, raise your hand. No one raised their hand. And then, yeah, it's that ego thing. And then when I asked if you said you're not suggestible, almost everyone raised their hand. And so what I did is I asked the most intimidating person in the room. He was about 6'6", very fit gentleman. He was African American. And I asked him to come in the middle of the room and just have a chat with me. And so he had his hands clasped like this, and we were just talking. And so by the end of our conversation, I asked him to pull his hands apart. And he tried with all his might, and he couldn't. And everyone in the room was just shocked, because we were just having a conversation just like you and I are having now. Now, if the reason I wanted to test this was because I wanted to prove to everyone that you can be manipulated as long as there's sound and language. And so as he was trying to pull his arms apart, I could see him get very anxious, and we don't want that in hypnosis because it's called an abreaction that could develop. And so immediately he said, sleep. He went to sleep. And that's when everyone realized exactly what I was trying to convey to everyone there in that group. But and during that process, I started to use some positive affirmations. Now that you're aware that you may be highly suggestible, that's the beginning of protecting yourself and so forth. But anyway, brought him back, and I asked him, now if I ask you if you thought you were highly suggestible, what would you say? And he said, I would have to agree. Obviously, you just demonstrated it. Now, for your audience, what this proved is that if there is this Havana syndrome or anomalous health incidents, which is what's popular in using today, Colonel Egren said that this was happening to the best of our best, not only in our embassies, our CIA, our FBI, and it's starting to affect elected politicians with here in the United States. We're also starting to complain of this phenomena. Now, they acknowledge that it's here and this exists, but it only acknowledged that it's happening and confirmed that it's happening with federal employees and some of their family members. And I think that's where they...
What was some of that phenomenon? What were some of the symptoms of that?
Acute onset of strange sounds,
Okay.
the vertigo, nausea, feeling like they have to vomit, short-term, long-term memory loss.
Okay.
They were brain fog, electrical shocks to the extremities, unexplainably. And Colonel Egren testified that they thought that this was a directed energy weapon. So it was being aimed at, it had to be aimed at you.
It was a
I
contract
know.
with the DOE and the Department of Defense most of my career, and I know a lot of men and women that have those kinds of symptoms.
Yes. So what they were, I know specifically Colonel Egren was talking about a case in Florida. And in that case, that was a directed energy weapon. But we wanted to use a common sense approach, is because we have been following this phenomenon for a long time now, almost 20 years. And what we realized, because people were coming up positive with an RF scan around their person at very specific focal points on the human body, near the human body. And all that proved is for whatever reason, we're detecting this RF signal. But our scanners can be calibrated to where you have to be within 2 inches of the emission, because we live in a wireless society. We needed a tool that we can do large amounts of scans over a very short period of time. So that was the first process. The secondary process, if you came up positive, we would say, well, depending on when this started, you might want to get a panoramic X-ray of the TMJ in the mouth area, and an MRI scan, if you could. But ultimately, we would want to put them in a very controlled environment, which is called an anechoic chamber. And I had the opportunity, because I was asked at the request of other government agencies overseas to come and test some of their diplomats and family members that they thought might be victim to this. They also allowed me to bring a group of folks over that I felt were being affected by this technology. And we used a control group, so people who weren't affected by it, we put them in the anechoic chamber, tested for frequencies, and we got nothing. And anechoic chamber,
is that similar to a Faraday cage or a skiff?
Well, it's a very, very robust Faraday cage. And they're millions of dollars, and they block out huge frequency spectrums, okay? But we knew we were testing for frequencies that were well within that spectrum that they block out there. And what was surprising, well, not surprising, but when we put those who came up positive in preliminary RF scans in that environment, we were detecting signals, which we shouldn't have in that environment. So it was at that point we can now say, okay, so these frequency emissions that we're detecting around the person are no longer coming from an outside source. They have to be coming from the human body. And So where are we at today? I'm going to share with your group here.
Hold on for just a second, please.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No
All
problem.
right, so I've got us on the side, and your document, I think, is up.
Okay, yep. So this is a document of one of my earliest clients. This is a female, and we redacted the lab and the physician and the name of my client so that they don't get bombarded with calls. And we want these people to continue to help our victims that come to us with this phenomenon. And this document, it's a collection of 3 specimens. They were actually removed 3 implants from her person. And when they went under microscopy, they were identified as sensors. And they're basically biosensors, semiconductors, what the analysis came back as. And the scary thing is that they are nano size. This is what they look like now. This is actually a nanowire array. And our bodies do not reject them. They actually encapsulate these specimens.
Do you know what that reminds
And
me of? Some
what's
of the
that?
work that the COVID people have been doing. They have very similar structures in the COVID vax. I'm not trying to throw you off there, but that's what it reminded me of.
I know, we'll touch on that because I'm going to go through the history real quick on where we were, 15, 20 years ago with these things and what they look like today. But these are all various different types of biosensors that were pulled out of her. And these were in locations where she came up positive on her RF scans. Okay. So this is what we're dealing with today. Now, when I say we used a common sense approach, remember Colonel Egrin thought these were directed energy weapons. I've had meetings with Secret Service people, talked to FBI agents. I've actually had meetings in conversation with physicians who were the head of 3-letter agencies within our government. And they sincerely thought that, they had no idea what was really affecting them. And I brought this to their attention. Have you considered that maybe it may be something internal that is allowing these people, unfortunately, to receive this signal? Now, I've always said that it has to be something uniquely different about the person because they're receiving the signal, because they're out in crowds. Why isn't everyone else being affected in the same way? We've taken people miles down underneath the earth where there's no cell signals. It's impossible to dial out under granite caverns, and we would test them there, and they were still receiving the frequency. We were still detecting it, is what I should say. So the only possible way you can do that is through a satellite transmission. Now, if you know anything about our telecommunication systems, our data systems, they're now integrated. It's one complete system where you have satellites, you have ground towers, microwave towers, all are integrated, and so they're all nodes.
In a wide area,
this is why
network style.
Yeah. Yep. And that's why you can't get away from this. So I'll show you what the history is and where we've come from. This is a case, the Bob Boyce case. He was an inventor of a high efficiency engine. And he ended up having 2 implants in him. And what we're looking at, this is actually a cancerous tumor. If you look at the end of these tweezers, this is an RFID chip. The
old technology.
Old technology, yes. And how he found this, well, I spoke to Bob and he said, look, he thought he was going to die from the cancer. And so he had mentally prepared himself that that's what his fate was going to be. And how he discovered this was the very same way in how we're out there finding these RF emissions. He had an RF detector. He was in a Faraday cage testing for RF leakage on his inventions. And the wand accidentally went by his shoulder and it pinged. And so he thought that was odd, got an x-ray. In the x-ray, they could see the microchip surrounded by this tumor. So he had it extracted surgically. It went to pathology. And I asked him, I go, well, what happened to the chip? And he says, well, it disappeared after pathology. So nonetheless, he was happy that his cancer went into remission, but it came back very aggressively. So he went back into the Faraday cage and he rescanned himself, and they found the second chip. This time they were smarter. They used a chain of custody, and they were able to get a serial number off the chip. And when they traced it back, it went to an NSA database. And so it was kind of stonewalled there because they said national security issue. The interesting thing is Bob knows now when this happened. He loves Mountain Dew. He was in his office and he drank a Mountain Dew, and then he woke up 3 days later. His business partner is what Bob believes drugged him in that Mountain Dew. And it turns out his business partner was a former NSA employee. So in Bob's case, he's pretty sure how that happened to him. Okay, but this is the older type rice chips. Now, through a FOIA release, we know that the U.S. military has been working with these kinds of things since the 40s and 50s. Here's another case.
Oddly
Now,
enough, just a little bit of trivia. Timothy McVeigh claimed that he was injected with these during his tour in the Army.
yeah, I had heard that story, but I've never been able to confirm that.
Correct.
But it wouldn't surprise me, and then I'm going to talk about why suggestibility is an important issue to look at. Now, this is a case from a politician down in Southern California. This is a Dave Larson case. He had many of these removed from his person, various types of biosensors, and he sued. And notice how small they are. This is the letter on a penny. They were almost that size. That was around 20 years ago. But my point here to demonstrate to listeners is these things are very, very small, and they're very, very difficult to detect through traditional medicine. And now we're dealing with the nano-size phenomenon, and the nano-size issue is they're so small that you're not going to detect them today with an X-ray or an MRI scan. It's going to be very, very difficult. And I had the opportunity to meet with a couple of folks who used to work for the Pentagon when I was over there with the military subcontractors, and they wanted to know what I was doing there. And I knew they already knew, but I talked about these implants, inferred, why I was invited to come and see these people. And they go, well, we can tell you exactly when they were being utilized by the style of the implant. And he says, but if you have them in you today, you're SOL. And the reason you're SOL is because they're now nano size, and you're just not going to see them through traditional medicine. You're going to have to go out and get an RF scan if you think this is the phenomena you're having.
Even if they start stacking them, they're hard to detect.
Yeah, you can literally put hundreds of these in the tip of a needle. That's how small they are nowadays. Now, I'm going to show a document to your audience, and this was the smoking gun, because this sounds like tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory. There's no way that this exists, right? So we've taken the approach, whatever we talk about, we make sure that we have valid data, that we can show that this is not a conspiracy theory. This is real. This is happening today. And we were fortunate enough to catch a smoking gun. And that smoking gun, I'm about to share with you. And can you see my screen?
Yep.
You can. Okay,
I like
perfect.
the dolphins.
Yeah.
They're not as friendly as some people might think, but
Yeah, they can be a little
aggressive,
a little testy. Yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to share with everyone is this is a case that was filed in 2019 by a woman by the name of Dawn DeVore. Now, Dawn DeVore was a RN who worked in the Department of Corrections. And I believe this suit was filed in Sacramento County in California. Now, she became a whistleblower, and what I'm about to show everyone is Exhibit 2 that was admitted as evidence, and it was an intercepted document. And it's by the IntelliConnection, a security division of IBM.
Yep.
And this is confidential, limited distribution only, level 9 communications. And there was only a handful of people that were supposed to have this document. But fortunately for us, she was able to obtain this. And it's titled 2020 Neural Chip Implant. And this is the control of crime will be a paramount concern in the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when a demand for them becomes popular. Our Research and Development Division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and the Massachusetts Department of Corrections to run limited trials of the 2020 neural chip implant. We have established representatives of our interest in both management and institutional levels within these departments. So they are strategically getting their people hired with a specific purpose to push this agenda. And the federal regulations do not yet permit testing of implants on prisoners, but we have entered into contractual agreements with privatized healthcare professionals and specified correctional personnel to do limited testing of our products. We have also had major success in privately owned sanitariums with implant technology. We need, however, to expand our testing to research how effective the 2020 neural chip implant performs in those identified as the most aggressive in our society. Limited testing has produced a number of results. In California, several prisoners were identified as members of a security threat group. They named the gangs. They were brought to Health Services Unit at Pelican Bay and tranquilized with advanced sedatives developed by our Cambridge, Massachusetts laboratories. The implant procedure takes 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon the experience of the technician. We are working on a device which will reduce that time by as much as 60%. The results of implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Implants served as surveillance monitoring devices for that threat group. Now, later on the document, this actually transmits and receives data. They can actually hear and see what's going on in the environment. Implants disabled 2 subjects during an assault on a correctional officer, so that they can just send a frequency to these implants and it'll completely incapacitate you. Universal side effects on all 8 test subjects revealed that when implants were set to 116 megahertz, all subjects became lethargic and slept on an average of 18 to 22 hours per day. All subjects refused recreation periods for 14 days during the 116 megahertz test evaluation. 7 and 8 subjects did not exercise. They didn't want to do any activity, of course. If you're lethargic and they're incapacitating you, you're not going to want to do these things. Each subject was monitored for aggressive activity during the test period, and the findings are conclusive that out of the 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression even when provoked. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose and ears 48 hours after the implant due to initial adjustment. Each subject had no knowledge of their implant for the test period, and each implant was retrieved under the guise of medical treatment. It should be noted
they had no informed consent here.
None whatsoever, which is completely against the Nuremberg Code. Yeah, it is just a complete violation. It should be noted that the test period was for less than 2 months. However, during the period, substantial data was gathered by our research and development team, which suggests that this implants exceeded expected results. One of the major concerns of the security and R&D team was that the test subject would discover the chemical imbalance during the initial adjustment period, and the test would have to be scrubbed. However, due to advanced technological developments and the sedatives administered, the 48-hour adjustment period can be attributed to prescription medication given to the test subjects after the implant. So instead of it being the implants itself, they're blaming it on the sedatives. One of the concerns raised by the R&D was the cause of bleeding and how to eliminate that problem. Unexplained bleeding might cause the subject to inquire further about his routine visit to the infirmary or other healthcare facility. The security windfall from the brief test period was enormous. Security officials now know several strategies employed by these gangs that facilitate the transmission of illegal drugs and weapons into their correctional facilities. One intelligence officer remarked that while they cannot use the information they have in a court of law, they now know who to watch and what outside connections they have. The prison at Soledad is now considering transferring 3 subjects to Vacaville, where we have engaging implant research. Our technicians have promised that they can do 2020 neurochip implants in less than an hour, do 3 of them in less than an hour. Soledad officials hope to collect information from the trio to bring a 14-month investigation into drug trafficking by correctional officers to a close. And here's if that's not crazy enough, here's where it gets completely insane. Essentially, the implants make the unsuspecting prisoner a walking, talking recorder of every event he comes into contact with. There are only 5 intelligence officers and commissioners of corrections who actually know the full scope of the implant testing. So this tells you how secretly guarded this document was. In Massachusetts, Department of Corrections has already entered into high-level discussions about releasing certain offenders to the community with the 2020 neurochip implants. Our people are not altogether against the idea. However, attorneys for the IntelliConnection have advised against implant technology outside strict control settings. Under the present governmental structure of our liability would be enormous. While we have a strong lobby in Congress and various state legislatures favoring our product, we must proceed with the utmost caution on uncontrolled use of the 2020 neurochip. If the chip were discovered in use, not authorized by law, and the procedure traced back to us, we could not endure for long the resulting publicity and liability payments. Massachusetts officials have developed an intelligence branch from their Fugitive Task Force Squad that would do limited test runs under tight controls with pre-release subjects. Correction officials have dubbed these potential test subjects the insurance group. The name derives from the concept that the 2020 implant ensures compliance with the law and allows officials to detect misconduct or violations without question. A retired police detective from Charleston, Massachusetts, now with the intelligence unit, has asked us to consider using the 2020 neurochip implant on hardcore felons suspected of bank and armed car robbery. The stated Charleston would never be the same. We'd finally know what was happening before they knew what was happening. We will continue to explore community uses of the 2020 chip by our company rep. Will be attached to all law enforcement operations with an extraction crew that can be on site in 2 hours from anywhere at any time. We have an IntelliConnection discussion group who is meeting within the Director of Security at Florence, Colorado's Federal Super Maximum Security Unit. The initial discussions with the director have been promising, and we hope to have an R&D unit at this important facility within the next 6 months. Legislative and executive branch efforts continue to legalize implant technology, and that pretty much says it all.
You know, some people may not have made the connection with this. This is outrageous for me, but
Yeah.
this is the same way the Holocaust started. They basically took powerless groups and experimented on them, not worrying about really the consequences to them, especially.
No, not at all. And
I'm not trying to defend these prisoners. I mean, obviously.
no, but here's the problem. And we know, because of our work over the last 20 years, that we knew that this was happening back in 2009, 2010. I have some cases that are as early as 2004. But we are now pulling these implants out of individuals. In fact, there's several cases that are working their way up through the court systems because of this evidence that we've been able to gather. And then you have the Presidential Bioethics Commission that was Amy Gutmann was the chair, who is now our ambassador to Germany at the UN. At that hearing, she was talking to Francis Collins, who is high up in the federal government with the NIH. And he talks about these MRI scans that have these unusual findings. He calls them UBOs, unidentified bright objects. He goes, do you want one in your brain? Well, you might. And the reason being, they are legitimately trying to decide which brain implant goes to whom. Does this personality type or genetic type of person deserve the chip that's going to allow them to be a doctor or a scientist or a sanitation worker? This is how crazy this is. Now, this was in 2005, that confirmation hearing. So this has been going on for a long time. Now, I had the privilege of being invited to a Presidential Bioethics Commission at the University of San Francisco Hospital. And Amy Gutmann was there, the military was on the board, and they were talking about back then about wanting to get a genome on every living organism on this planet. And what she said during that hearing, because of there's all kinds of legalities and human rights violation and constitutional issues, they regard the subject matter. Now, and what do we own as human beings, and what is our autonomy? They are the opinion, and she said this right there at this meeting, that they are the top 1% of the elite 1% that should be deciding what should be done to your body. Now, think about this. Then I know at the Presidential Bioethics Commission that they were talking about getting the genomes of every living organism on this planet so that they can get a patent on it. So what does that mean? What does it mean if they have a patent on your DNA? Now, I thought that was insane. And I, when I heard that, and it was really difficult for me to comprehend that. Recently, I had a meeting with an investigative scientific journalist, and she was probably one of the brightest people I've ever met in my life. I'd say in the top 10. And what she was telling me, that in the 70s, they redefined the definition in the law books of what a human being was. Okay. Now we're down to these nanosizes, technologies. They're self-replicating, self-generating technologies now they're able to utilize. Now remember, self-assembling, yes. And what she said is that they're putting these in the human genome now. Not only are they self-assembling, they can attack certain portions and attach to certain portions of your DNA. So what does that mean?
That's with the knowledge that they have and the use of the CRISPR and the mRNA technologies, they can build the circuitry. All they have to add is a little bit of ferrous material and voila, they can build it inside you.
Yeah, and so what happens is you're no longer defined as human. There are research articles that says it only takes 6 generations to change a species. So if they change what being human is through technology, you are no longer human. They can obtain a patent, and then you are completely enslaved. What we are faced with is we have less rights now than animals. Animals have more rights than us today, and that is where we are at today, and that's the atrocity that we're facing. And this is why we've taken the position to go out to the general population and say, hey, look, you guys might want to take a look at this way instead of going on this busy tract that society is being maneuvered in. Because if this agenda is completely achieved, there is no hope for the human species. So my belief is that I hope that our Lord and Savior is the ultimate programmer, and that he's going to make these idiots look like fools. I hope, and I
Have you
hope that they
taken a
don't
look at
achieve
any
this
of the stuff
agenda.
from
Yeah.
Dr. Artis? He had him and I think Dr. Peter McCullough are working on and have developed treatments to inactivate this stuff uh, and flush it from the body. And I didn't want to interrupt you, but
Yeah. No.
and then there's Sarah Wallace, who's claiming that because of the way they're assembling them now, that they're immune to EMP, which was one of the ways they used to attack the implants in the previous generations of implants.
Yeah. I have not come across any case that did not stop this without surgical intervention.
Okay.
So I'd be interested to hear and test out what they're talking about. But it has been very, very difficult to stop these symptoms without surgical intervention. Now, here's the issue that we're facing now. These physicians who have been removing these implants from people who have been testing positive in these RF scans are now being threatened to have their licenses revoked.
Yep.
And they lose their ability to keep a living. So what's the agenda? Now, Colonel Egrin, remember this, he's saying that this is happening to the best of our best. Now, why would we do that to the best of our best? What I truly believe is happening is we're probably in an arms race. Remember, he said this is happening on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. President Putin gave a presentation. He did an interview in the Politico, and he said the first superpower to master psychotronic weapons will be the superpower to rule the world. Which superpowers have this technology? We know the United States can do it. We know that Russia can. They're probably ahead of us in this technology. We know that China can do this, and we know the UK can do this. The reason I know the UK is there was a gentleman back when we were in ISAC, we had the privilege of interviewing a gentleman by the name of Dr. Barry Trower. And if your folks can watch that video, and I'll give you the links to it, but we did that interview, and he was a microwave weapons specialist, and he was an agent for the UK, and he's coming out speaking against these technologies. And he said back then it was easy to transmit voices in people's heads and get them to commit suicide, and that was considered a success. And that's how crazy some of these belief systems that these people have are. And
I told you some of the things that were happening to veterans in terms of vivid dreams and sounds. It would make them seem crazy, but
yeah,
it's almost explainable.
Well, I have the answer to that that belief there. There is a document, it's called the New World Vistas, and it was released in November of 1994. It was declassified, and we happen to have a copy of it. And it's called New World Vistas, and we obtained it in 1995. And it was by the Defense Technical Information Centers, and this was the brightest minds of our Air Force. And the whole idea was to look 50 years into the future to keep the United States Air Force a superpower. And I shortened this up so I can go to the highlighted areas. This is a 222-page report, but on page 89 of that report is called Biological Processes. And I'll read the highlighted areas because it addresses exactly what you just said. And it says, it appears likely there are a number of physical agents that might actively but largely benignly interact or interfere with biological processes in an adversary in a manner that will provide our armed forces tools to control these adversaries without extensive loss of life or property. These physical agents could include acoustic fields, optical fields, electromagnetic fields, and combinations thereof. This paper will address only the prospect of physical regulation of biological processes using electromagnetic fields. Prior to the mid-21st century, there will be a virtual explosion of knowledge in the field of neuroscience. We will have achieved a clear understanding on how the human brain works, how it really controls the various functions of the body, and how it can be manipulated both positively and negatively. One can envision the development of electromagnetic energy sources, the output of which can be pulse, shaped, and focused, that can couple with the human body in a fashion that will allow one to prevent voluntary muscular movements. Remember the prisoners. Control emotions and thus actions, produce sleep, transmit suggestions, interfere with both short-term and long-term memory loss. Remember, best of our best, the diplomats. Produce an experience set and delete an experience set. This will open the door for the development of some novel capabilities that can be used in armed conflict, in terrorist hostage situations, and in training. New weapons that offer the opportunity of control of an adversary without resorting in a lethal solution or collateral casualties can be developed around this concept. This would offer significant improvements in the capabilities of our special operations forces. Initial experimentation should be focused on the interaction of electromagnetic energy and the neuromuscular junctions involved in muscle control. It would also appear possible to create high-fidelity speech in the human body, raising the possibility of covert suggestions and psychological direction. When a high-powered microwave pulse in the gigahertz range strikes the human body, a very small temperature perturbation occurs. This is associated with sudden expansion of slightly heated tissue. The expansion is fast enough to produce an acoustic wave. If a pulse stream is used, it should be possible to create an internal acoustic field in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, which is audible. Thus, it may be possible to talk to selected adversaries in a fashion that would be most disturbing to them. We used the voice of God weapon in Afghanistan. They were transmitting Allah's voice in their heads, and they were just giving up. They attempted to use this at Waco, but they used it incorrectly, and that turned into a disaster. Yep. It says, in comparison to the discussion in the paragraphs above, the concept of imprinting an experience set is highly speculative, but nonetheless highly exciting. Modern electromagnetic scattering theory raises the prospect that ultra-short pulse scattering through the human brain can result in reflective signals that can be used to construct a reliable estimate of the degree of central nervous system arousal. The concept behind this remote EEG is to scatter off action potentials or ensembles of action potentials in major central nervous system tracts. Assuming we will understand how our skills are imprinted and recalled, it might be highly possible to take this concept one step further and duplicate the experience set in another individual. So I'm not sure if your audience understands what I just read, but
hallucinations and sounds that are not real.
And memories.
Correct.
that aren't real. Experiences sets that aren't real. They can take someone's experience set and imprint it in you.
And it seems to me, based on the conversations that I've had with some people, that those things can be induced accidentally just because of the proliferation of those kinds of signals that exist in our in our modern environment.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that aspect of it, but I do know that the people that are suffering from this are manipulated to do things that they would not normally do, that is not innate to their personality. So this is why my fight is to bring this awareness to the general population, because it's the number one defense right now. It's the only thing that can protect you from doing these things. Now, why do I say this? There's a name, Aaron Alexis. He was a military person who went and killed 16 people at the Navy Yard on the East Coast, okay? Myron May was an attorney out of Florida who went and shot 3 people at the university there in their research department. They both contacted me prior to them doing this, and I had no idea that they were going to do it. But what happens initially when you're exposed to this technology is you're in fight or flight mode, and their personality makeup was they were fighters. They wanted guidance and help, and I said to both of them, this is not a short-term fix. This is going to be a long-term journey, and they were not prepared for that. And so I keep thinking over and over in my mind, was there anything different I could have done? And there wasn't. I had no idea that they were planning to do what they did, but they ended up doing what they did. And so this is why I address the fact that people who are highly suggestible need to start getting intervention now, because if you're exposed to this, it's going to be very, very difficult to overcome what the agenda is.
It reminds me, I mean, I know people within my community who suffer from some of these symptoms, and they're not even military people or federal employees. They're church leaders, civic leaders, people in high visibility positions.
So you think about that. If we're not in an arms race, then this is social manipulation on steroids. What happens if this is done to one of our world leaders? And what are the implications there? If you wanted to start a war, this would be a way to do it. This is why this is a very, very important topic. It's a very important issue. And now with these nanotechnology technologies coming out, it's very important that we stand together. This divide and conquer mentality has not worked over generations, and it's time that human beings wake up, that we all need to band together, because that's where our power is.
Well, this is kind of an emotional subject for me because of I'm not a special forces guy or any of that, but I spent a significant period of my life as a person who believed in his oath that he took for the country, and believe that I still haven't set down that oath. And I know people just from my experience in the government, both from the Manhattan Project, from Iraq wars, and in current day, who have been subjected to various kinds of covert testing and have suffered for it, and have been disposed of by the people they took an oath to protect. And it's disturbing for me.
Yeah, I'm one of those people too. And I took an oath, and I still, I believe in our government system. I believe we're in the best country on the planet to live in. I just don't believe in the corruption in our government. And I think, that's how I hold true to my oath. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I will continue to do this until the day I leave this planet.
If you were asked, what is the most important thing based on your experience and your belief system and your worldview that you would convey to people who even have a remote interest in this topic, what would that be?
Number one is education is your first line of defense. So becoming aware is most important. Having a good sense of who you are internally, identifying with what your true spirit is, because each and every one of us innately knows who we are. We know what our moral compass is. Once you can identify that and you can become in alignment with that, then it's very, very difficult to manipulate you. And this is part of the topics that I talk about. I'm writing a book called Undue Influence, turning your suggestibility into a superpower. So even if you are highly suggestible, it's not the end of the world. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Because you're highly suggestible, you can program yourself in a positive way, because you're in tune with your internal spirit, you're in tune with your moral compass. And so you can use techniques to to take advantage of that. In addition, through hypnotherapy, you can also swing the pendulum of suggestibility to where you're more towards normal, and then you can use things like critical thinking factors that are more in line with you staying autonomous, and that's the whole key. Remember, our autonomy is, they're trying to take our autonomy away. They're trying to put a patent on you, and they're trying to. We're about to see slavery at a level where we've never seen before in human history. So it's important that we stay in tune with that.
It's a grim subject, and we could spend hours doing this, but I think probably most people are either at a mental or emotional overload. So I'd like to finish up with one more question, and unless there's another quick subject that you want to cover.
No, that's fine.
So what would be your contact information and current projects or such that you're working on? I'm going to put all of that in the description at the bottom of this video when I put it online, but just give us a feel for how people could follow up and get more information, and stay tuned.
Yeah, you can go to www.mindnexuslive.com. So MINDLIVENEXUS.com, and fill out a contact form, any questions that you may have, and then we'll reach back out to you.
Okay. And what's the name of your book that's coming out again?
It's called Undue Influence, Turning Your Suggestibility into Your Superpower.
Okay. You have a conference or something coming up soon, don't you?
Yeah, we did have a conference that was coming up. Unfortunately, it's going to have to be postponed. We didn't meet the minimum ticket sales, although we were close. So we just have to hold off a little bit, and then another date will be determined.
Okay, I look forward to that. I was actually going to tap in on that remotely for the 3-day pass.
Yeah. So, but what we are doing in the interim, we're going to be starting a new podcast. Ben Chastain, who at his highest peak had 70 million followers. So we're really excited about that, to get that going. And we're going to launch it the week of the 26th.
Oh, perfect. Do you mind if I say a prayer for us?
No, not at all.
Okay. Dear Lord, bless this man, Jesse Beltran, for the work that he's doing. Place your shield over him and those around him. Give him courage and sustenance and strength to continue pursuing this. Help us all. Show us your love. Show us the bright future once again, and help us dismiss the influences of the deceiver. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
And on that note, that's a good note to stop on.